Sometimes supernatural phenomena occur in the world that are difficult to believe. The target that was in front of the main character was a creature that looked almost like people, but in reality, monsters thirsting for blood. The main character was a special agent who exterminate those very monsters, or as they are also called, vampires. While working, the guy realized that a bad feeling always comes true. When the main character cleaned himself up after work, the guy who got scared on the mission came up and started asking for forgiveness for the way he behaved. But Shin only told him that everything was normal and went to the boss's office. When Shin left the boss's office, he began to get angry and promised himself that he would no longer take newcomers as his partners, since it was better for him to be on missions himself. So he thought before Keith Noah appeared at their headquarters. 2 weeks ago, while Shin was sleeping at his workplace, he was woken up by the chief, who told the guy to urgently get ready and run to the roof, since he was going on a business trip for 2 days and 1 night. Shin, with his boss and former partner, flew to the training camp for recruits. The anti-vampire agents belong to an organization called Z-Sex, but to the public they operate under the guise of the FBI. Agents are officially hired only after completing 18 weeks of training and passing an exam at the FBI Academy. The boss gave Shin a stack of papers and ordered him to choose a partner. When Shin went to the toilet, a guy started to come out from around the corner, and the main character, because of his instincts, jumped back and crouched down in preparation for an attack. But when he saw that it was just a man, he quickly apologized and ran on. While Shin was having lunch, the chief ordered him to go through the final exam with the students and choose a recruit, and although he continued to claim that he did not need a partner, the chief threw him into the exam. While Shin was sitting and waiting for his turn, I accidentally fell asleep and woke up to the fact that his opponents were attacking him. But by chance, the guy finished them in the best possible time, which the boss wasn't very happy about. And while he was sitting on the podium, a guy approached him and introduced himself as Shin's next opponent. Shin recognized the guy because he had recently read about him on the lists of recruits. The guy graduated from West Point Military Academy and took a leading position in the first close combat test. But despite this, he is a newbie with no experience in real operations. 12. As soon as Shin stepped onto the mat, the chief warned him that the guy would give it his all, and he realized that first he needed to remove the instructor from the mat, which he did. As soon as the guy won the sparring, Noah ran up to him and asked him for his phone number. When Shin met Chef, she praised him and said that he won $100, but she only bought him a sandwich. As soon as she decided to ask whether the guy had chosen a partner, he only replied that he didn't like anyone. It turned out that Noah was the best in the exam, but Shin asked that he under no circumstances get into their branch because he thought that the guy was from some rich family where dust was blown off him every now and then. 2 weeks later, when Shin came to work, his colleagues began to make fun of him for the way he was dressed. But then, behind him, the guy heard the angry voice of the chief, who was angry that the guy was late for work again. But then she introduced Noah to the guy, and she said that now he is his partner. While all the other recruits were talking with their elders, Noah stood and looked at how Shin was sleeping. But then John decided to wake him up so that the guy would not suffer. But as soon as Shin woke up and asked his new partner to sit down, he immediately failed back to sleep again. Suddenly, Shin jumped up from his seat and told Goa to follow him, as it was time for him to receive the title. When the guy followed his senior, he expected an individual lesson, but he never expected that other recruits would also study with them. Noah began asking the interns one by one about what they knew about vampires. Afterwards, the guy turned on the video to the guys and gave them the task of figuring out who was in the video, a vampire or a civilian. For everything about everything, Shin gave the trainees an hour. And after that, he saw that misunderstanding was frozen on the guys' faces. The intern's girlfriend was infuriated by the way Shin was behaving, and therefore she preferred endurance training to working out with a guy who doesn't care. When the guys left the office, Noah thought about the fact that very often human relationships work on the give and take principle, which makes it difficult to find sincere kindness. Noah admitted that initially he did not want to go to New York, but when he came to his senses, he already ended up in this branch. In the 12th week of the internship, the girl was very angry that their elders pretended to be busy and shifted responsibilities to each other. As soon as Ramirez began to complain about all her partners and blame everything on Sheen, Noah asked her not to talk about his partner like that, since she would rather talk about all three than about one Shin, because it will be fair. When Noah looked for Shin, he again saw his partner sleeping, and squatting down next to him, he began to examine him and think that very soon they would get closer, and the guy would make everything that the guy had his own. Suddenly Shin opened his eyes, and he started asking what the guy was doing near him. Suddenly Carrie ran up to the guys, grabbed Shin by the hand, and said that they urgently needed to go to the call, and the guys should go together. It turned out that Shin and his partner were going on a completely different call, and his colleagues not far from him would also be inspecting the surroundings. As soon as Shin's former partner approached the guys began to talk away from everyone, and Noah, who was watching this, began to get angry, since it looked like the guys were very close. But then, Agent John came to the guy's aid and told him why the guys were so close. At the crime scene, Shin immediately began giving out tasks to everyone, and Noah was watching him at the time and realized that he didn't even know how old his partner was. Then Mark approached the guy and asked the guy not to look so warily at his partner. While Shin and the guy were examining the crime scene, the former explained that the murdered girl who had become infected did not have a boyfriend, and having found photos of her friends, he assumed that the source of infection was somewhere among these two girls. Shin began to explain the whole situation to Noah, and the guy was surprised at how his partner was able to find so much evidence in such a short time and understand who the killer was. The guy was immediately calmed down by Shin's former partner, having said that it is impossible to achieve ideal results in 2 weeks. While the guys were examining the crime scene, Mark found the girl's friends, and it turned out that one of them had not gone outside for a long time, and her lover had also disappeared without a trace. Therefore, the guys decided to immediately go to the hostel where they last saw the girl. Alen was already taking the guys to the place where Eunice Pine could be, and explained to Noah how he should behave, because this was his first but unofficial task. Then Carrie called Sheen and said that in the club they found the girl's boyfriend and that both incidents were connected. Having risen to the desired floor, the guys did not immediately notice anything, but then Shin was attacked from above by the converted Eunice Pine. But the guy managed to react in time and used a pistol to destroy the vampire. Noah immediately ran up to the guy and said that he was glad that they were partners. After the McCain family case, there was a lull. But Shin had already forgotten that vampires are most active in the summer, so their squad in the building was attacked by many vampires, but the agents dealt with them. As soon as Shin found Noah, he began to ask about his condition, but the guy could not tell him that his whole body was aching in pain. Once Shin was disinfected because he had too much vampire blood on him. He met with the rest of his colleagues, and everyone began to discuss how many hours the operation itself took, and why the guy took so long to get in touch. While Shin was resting, Noah tried with all his might to get to him, but the guy still did not accept his help. Although the guy did not want to behave kindly with his partner, he gave in to him and took the sandwich from him. Unexpectedly, Shin praised Noah and immediately passed out on his colleague's shoulder. Suddenly, the guy asked why his mentor was called the First, and the guys began to remember how it all started. The guys started talking about how 2 years ago the guys were called to an urgent task during the holidays. Then Shin had just entered the service, and the guys immediately decided to make him their leader because of his last name, and the guy immediately agreed, which greatly surprised the guys. As soon as the guys said that Noah was lucky with his partner, the chief came up to them and said that they did a great job, and the guys were immediately forced to return to headquarters and write a detailed report about their actions, since the top wanted to know how it all happened and ended. Shin was entrusted to his partner, and so Noah took the guy to the duty room, since he still wouldn't wake up until his battery was charged to 100%. As soon as the guy started to cover his partner, Shin pushed him away because he was hot. As soon as Shin woke up, he realized that finally, over the past few days, he was able to sleep properly. The guy looked at the time and realized that he had slept through the plane. the ticket for which he had booked 2 months ago. Shin started yelling at his colleagues for not even being able to set an alarm for him, and then the chief came up behind him and ordered the guy to start making a report on yesterday's mission. The guy immediately sat down and started writing a report, while simultaneously calling the airport and asking what the earliest flights to Los Angeles were. While Shin was waiting for the elevator to quickly go to the airport, Noah approached him and started asking him about who the guy was in such a hurry to see. Noah decided to please his partner. That's why they flew together on his private jet. And already in the sky, the guy was surprised at how rich Noah was. While the guys were talking and having lunch, Noah decided to ask why Shin needed to fly to Los Angeles, and the guy began to regret more and more that he got on this plane. And the main character admitted that he was flying to his cousins. As soon as the guys landed, a car with a driver was already waiting for Noah, and he invited Shin to go with them. But the guy decided to run away from them, saying that he was renting a car for his business. Mr. Thompson was glad that things had worked out between the boys and they were getting along well. It turned out that Mr. Thompson had already made inquiries about the first one, and Noah was surprised that the guy was 6 years older than him. The guy knew that one word was his, and all the information about Shin Kevin will be in his hands. In addition, he is sure that his partner will not reveal him. When Shin ran to the meeting place, his brothers were already impatiently waiting for him. While the guys were eating, the first one remembered that incident, after which only he and his 2 cousins remained from his family. He understood that the guys were trying to keep up, but still invited them to go with him to New York. The guys refused to go with their older brother to New York because they did not want to leave their friends, and they also wanted to join the football team. Although it was an expensive activity, Shin still allowed the guys to go and train if they wanted to. While Shin was sitting and thinking about how to thank the chief and Noah, he saw the news on TV, and what he saw shocked him. When the guy returned back to the city, he did not leave the office as if glued, which greatly surprised his colleagues, since the guy was constantly sleeping at that time. When Shin finished his work, Noah approached him and scared him. The guy guessed that the first one felt indebted to him. The next day, the newcomers began weeks of close combat training, with more realistic situations they might find themselves in on missions. When the training began, Shin and his colleagues watched what was happening on the training ground. Alan, watching the guys, remembered how the first one constantly ran after him and asked for sparring. 10 days later, all the new guys became friends and didn't miss a single training session. And while they were changing clothes, the guys noticed that Noah had a lot of bruises on his body, and it turned out that Noah didn't spare anyone. The guys began to discuss how their mentors were tearing them to pieces. When the first one entered the locker room, the guys saw that there was not a single scratch on him, and there was not a single living spot on them. The guys started asking him questions about how Shin navigates in the dark. As soon as the first one began to leave, Noah noticed that he had a huge scar stretching across his entire back. 3 hours ago, when Shin came out of the shower, Noah was already waiting for him, who decided to ask the guy where the scar appeared on his back. But the first one skillfully got along with them, and therefore the guy decided to ask if it was because of him that all these training sessions were organized. Shin explained to the guy that he arranged all these trainings so that the guys could navigate in the dark, and so that they would not rely on a pistol, but would know how to use a knife. As soon as the guy left, Agent Max advised Noah to take the former to dinner so that he could rest a little. As soon as Noah saw how exhausted Shin was, he took the guy to a restaurant to eat meat, on Max's advice. And the first one, of course, liked everything, but he was embarrassed by the fact that the guy stood out too much. While the first one was eating, he realized that he had fallen into Noah's trap. When the guys left the restaurant, Shin thought about the fact that Noah really has ideal model parameters and that he is handsome. Even when he looked at his photo, he was sure that the guy was handsome. As soon as the first one wanted to leave, he admitted that compared to Noah, he looked like a cuttlefish. As he left, Shin thought about how strange Noah was, because on the first day, now he runs after him everywhere, but does not fawn on him too much. He doesn't ask to be treated in any special way, and the guy constantly refuses him, because the first one thought how he wasn't tired of it yet. Shin realized that this time, he most likely met a partner who would definitely not leave him, because he needed a person with good skills, one that won't run away after the first difficulties. However, the first had one thought, that he would like to work with Noah for a long time. At the next training session, Shin repaid Noah for everything he had done in full. Therefore, the guy realized that a few more such treats, and he would definitely go to the next world. And as soon as Noah began to leave the training field, the first one promised that he would beat him so much that he would have enough for the rest of his life. The chief thanked all the mentors for training the newcomers diligently and warned that now he would send everyone on a real mission much faster than usual. Noah was a little upset that Shin went to rest and didn't even say anything to him, even though they were partners. Noah started looking for Shin because they had to go out to dinner with their colleagues. The guy found the first one sleeping on a bench in the locker room. But the first one refused because he wanted to sleep, but John immediately grabbed him and forced him to go with them. Noah began to press the first one for pity, since just recently he stood alone while the other guys talked with their partners, and therefore he had to agree and go drinking. At the bar, Shin was drinking very hard, and his colleague explained to Noah that in 6 months she and the guy would improve their relationship. Noah, observing the good relationship Shin had with his colleagues, began to think that when he talks with senior agents, the atmosphere becomes completely different. Although he thought that after that dinner he and the first would become closer, it apparently didn't really help. As soon as Shin lay down a little on the table, Noah realized that the guy had had a little too much to drink. But suddenly the first one lay down on his partner's shoulder, and all his colleagues were very surprised by this and said that Noah was incomparable, since he even treated the guy to his favorite meat. Senior agents explained to Noah that the first one was acting so coldly because he was always unlucky with his partners. They didn't stick with him for half a year and just left. It's just that they have such a job at the agency that many new people can't stand it. And the first one was the most unlucky. Suddenly, Shin woke up and went to get some air, and as soon as Noah was about to follow him, the senior agents asked him to take the guy home. As soon as the guy found the first one, he was completely drunk, but suddenly Shin fell to the floor and said that he would sleep a little. As soon as Noah took the guy by the arm, Shin stood on his tiptoes and kissed him on the cheek, saying that the guy was charming and a miracle. But then the senior agents left the bar, and John took the first one, since he understood that the guy did not like to be in debt to anyone. The next day, Shin didn't understand what was happening to Noah, because the guy was looking at him without looking away. As soon as Noah wanted to ask if the first one remembered anything from yesterday's dinner, a senior agent ran up to the guy and said that he was urgently called in for a call. Noah went on a mission with Shin, and therefore the guy gave him a lot of instructions on how to behave in a given situation. While the guys were inspecting the floor, they heard screams from the 3rd floor, and so they ran towards the sounds together. It turned out that the vampire began to strangle Ramirez, and as soon as he began to think that he did not want to die, a girl came to his aid. But the guy saw that he had run into a fragment and could not run away quickly. As soon as the vampire began to attack the girl, Shin and Noah came to her aid. Clifford couldn't take aim to shoot at the vampire, so the first one attacked the target from behind and let the guy shoot clearly at the target. And Shin immediately began to scold Noah and warned him to keep his ears open. While the guys were returning to the agency, the senior agents praised Noah for eliminating the target, but the guy began to brush it off and say that this was entirely Shin's merit, because he did almost all the work for him. Sitting in the psychologist's office, Clifford remembered his father's warning. The psychologist brought the guy out of those memories and said that everything was normal with his mental state. When Noah left the office, he met his colleague there, who reproached him for being too calm. When Noah walked along the corridor, he met Shin there, who, as soon as he found out that everything was normal with the guy's head, sent him to write a report. But unexpectedly, Clifford asked the first one if he was useless, but the first one only reminded him of his past partners and calmed the guy down. Shin praised Noah and said that he did a good job, and so the guy decided to strike and reminded the first one that Shin kissed him during dinner. And Noah realized that little by little this intractable and stubborn ice began to melt. With the arrival of autumn, vampires appear in public less often. However, without exaggeration, it can be understood that New York is a city of vampires. Therefore, an endless series of busy days never stops here, and after such long, hard, everyday life, someone is sure to quit. Jeha noticed that Clifford seems to treat everyone well, presses a smile, but at the moments when someone leaves, for some reason he is completely indifferent to others. But perhaps he only runs after the first one like a puppy. After those words that Noah said to the first, the guy was constantly nervous, and his partner was constantly hovering around him. So the guy called him outside to talk. And when they left, Shin apologized for that kiss and said that it was because he had too much alcohol. Noah forgave the first one and said that he understood everything, but asked Shin to fulfill his request. After every time he did a good job, the guy should praise him, like before the elevator, and asked him to just treat him much better. As soon as the guys entered the building, the employee said that a guest had come to Clifford, and when Noah saw the person who came to him, he was very horrified. It turned out that his older brother came to see him. Shin was very surprised by how nervous his partner had become. Unexpectedly, Clifford's older brother reported that their father had fainted. So Shin left the boys alone so they could talk together. But Noah only said that he and the first would go together, because if his father was dying, Thompson would have warned him. When the guys got into the elevator, Shin suggested Noah to warm up and invited him to a duel, because the guy wanted it so much. After the fight, the first one told the younger one to clean up the gym and go home, since after the weekend he would push him even harder. When Shin woke up, he immediately began to feed his cat. Her name is Queen. The owners of this cat are a married couple living on the floor above. They are Chinese by nationality. Sometimes the Queen comes down and begs the first one for food, and he gives her food and quietly sends her out. Leaving the house, Shin saw Noah, who was waiting for him. It turned out that the first one mumbled his address when he was drunk. When the guy took a closer look at his partner, he realized that he looked even more tired than before. Noah decided to suggest that the first one go and get something to eat somewhere. Noah decided to ask how to pronounce the first name correctly, but Shin started laughing because the guy was trying to learn his last name. The first one decided to agree and go have breakfast with his partner, and while they were waiting for their order, Shin began to ask the guy about what happened to him. It turned out that after the visit of his older brother Noah, his father came to him. It turned out that there is one procedure that Clifford has been doing since childhood. At a meeting with his father, he is given an injection. After the guys started training together, Noah began to hope for the former. Suddenly, Shin stood up from his seat and patted Noah on the head. After the guys had breakfast, Clifford admitted that he hates being touched, but since it was the first time, he didn't mind, because a guy behaves this way only around his partner. As soon as Noah's driver approached the guys, Shin refused to go with them and asked next time to come in a smaller car and without a driver, and then he would get in and go with Noah together. It turned out that some girl was following the guys, and as soon as she saw Clifford, she realized that she had found what she was looking for. When Shin arrived at the office, he immediately went to the conference room to check the lists of the dead. But he was immediately interrupted by Noah, who decided to ask about the task that the guy had given him. But then, a girl joined them and began to talk about how the first one could understand the category of vampires by their eyes. Noah thought that since then he and Shin had become very close, but he was mistaken about that. He thought that everything bad that happened between them could be forgotten like a bad dream, but only he thought so. Shin began to scold Noah for getting ahead of the senior agent on a mission, so the guy ordered him to take off all his uniform. After that, Noah called first and suggested they go for a bite to eat, but he never expected that they would go to an expensive restaurant for a bite to eat. While the guys were eating, a girl in the restaurant started screaming. It turned out that some guy suddenly lost consciousness and fell. Shin began to provide the guy with first aid as he realized what was happening to him. Suddenly, Shin saw a girl in the crowd and remembered that this was his brother's wife, and he immediately asked to block all entrances and exits, since throughout all his work he had learned to understand his bad feeling, because the girl turned out to be a bloodsucker of the highest level. Often one event divides a person's life into before and after. Initially, Shin did not intend to become an agent. His childhood dream was to become a doctor. When the entire headquarters gathered in the conference room, they began to discuss the fact that Shin saw the most powerful vampire in the restaurant. Although Shin identified this person, the boss assigned other guys to search for her and ordered the first one to gain weight, because he had lost a lot of weight. The girl asked him to leave so that his head could cool down, but the guy hit the table hard and flew out of the office. 94. Noah found Shin on the roof of the building, and when he asked what happened to him, he was the first to say that it was none of his business. As soon as the guy turned on the phone, he saw many messages from his brothers, but they didn't even pick up the phone. Noah decided to help Shin, and so they flew together on his private jet to Los Angeles to visit the former's brothers. It turned out that Shin's brother got into a fight, and he accidentally broke the guy's arm. And although the former knew that the younger one had a hot temper, his brother never started a fight from the moment the former became their guardian. It turned out that the Shin family became victims of a vampire, and this case was talked about in the news for a long time. Many years have passed since then. Then it was grandfather Shin's birthday. The whole family gathered, including the brother's parents, his uncle, and his wife. Shin still didn't know, fortunately or unfortunately, but the children then stayed in the dormitory. They said that their studies were more important. That's why they didn't come, and that's how they survived. But the guy was a little late and also survived. Clifford decided to go with the guy to his brother's school because he knew how to communicate with rich guys. Noah took Shin to a clothing store because he needed a makeover for the upcoming war. As soon as the guys picked up their clothes, they immediately rushed to the boys' school. It turned out that the guy who was hit by Shin was a racist and constantly used various obscene words towards the guys. It turned out that the guy insulted Shin and said that he earns money with his body, because it is impossible to pay for their school otherwise. Suddenly, Haywin started crying because Shin had done a lot for them, but he was so insulted. As soon as the guys left, Shin began talking to the lawyers about what they should do better, since it turned out that there was no inheritance, and therefore the first one paid the guys for school from his own pocket, but they didn't know about it, and Shin didn't want to. It was brought to light. Noah suggested to Shippen that the children learn the whole truth about the inheritance now, since they have the right to know. And although the first one considered them kids, they suddenly became grown-up guys. So he realized that he had to become a guardian for whom he would not be ashamed. The meeting was tense from the very beginning, and the mother of that schoolboy brought as many as 2 lawyers. She said that her child was in no way to blame, and repeated that all responsibility lay with Haywin with his wild character. She ignored the testimony of witnesses present at the time of the incident. Unexpectedly, Noah said that reinforcements had come to them. It turned out that his sister had come to help them. Shin realized that Keith asked her to perform a performance in front of that boy's family. Everyone in the office knew her, and therefore fell into a stupor when she appeared, and therefore the whole matter was decided in 5 minutes. When the guys were drinking together, Noah apologized to Shin for not telling about his sister. The first admitted that he admired the fact that even though the guy was from a rich family, he still went to work where he wanted. Suddenly, Keith approached the guy, and he asked if he wanted to know more about him. Suddenly, Keith asked if the person Shin called the Queen was his girlfriend. But the guy just laughed and showed him a photo of a cat whose name was Queen. The first, having finished the story, went into the room to sleep, leaving Noah in his thoughts. Shin returned to the living room with more cans of beer and saw that Keith was still awake. The first admitted that he has insomnia, although it is not severe, but when stress accumulates, he begins to have problems sleeping. And the guy immediately asked Noah to move and lay down on his lap and fell asleep. As soon as Keith laid Shin on the bed, he was about to leave and saw that the guy in his sleep grabbed his hand, and so the guy had to lie down next to the first. When Shin woke up, he was very surprised that he was sleeping next to Noah. Suddenly, Shin received a call and was informed that they urgently needed to return, as they had a call. It turned out that the guys would not be able to be on the same team since the Los Angeles agency had such rules. 4 groups went on the mission, and each had to inspect 10 houses as soon as Clifford and his partner entered the first house. The people there directed them on the trail of one of the vampires, who was already running away from them. As soon as 2 targets were discovered, Clifford ran in search of the first one, since he now had no support. But when the guys met, Shin ordered Noah to lie on the ground, since this target was his, and he himself would kill him. Just when Clifford thought that Shin would be attacked from behind and he would not cope, the first completed the mission and destroyed the target. It turned out that Shin was wounded by a vampire, and although he was injected with an ampule, it is possible that he will turn into a vampire. So he gave the gun to a colleague and told them to act according to protocol. Shin was given a reprieve of 24 hours. If he begins to turn into a vampire, he will be immediately eliminated, and if not, he will be released from arrest. Noah kept urging the doctors to quickly transfuse blood to the first one, but they acted according to the protocol. Noah still forced them to urgently transfuse Shin's blood and told them to use it. But as it was written in the manual, it was impossible to take blood from Noah and transfuse it to someone. Keith still agreed for the doctors to take his blood, but now he had to force the first one to agree. Suddenly, Keith leaned over and kissed Shin, and asking not to kick him out, he admitted that he liked the first one, and that he loved him. That's why the first one allowed him to stay nearby. And in New York, the boss was going to go to Shin, because he couldn't just leave him. Shin couldn't understand how it all started. He didn't shake his hand that day, and Noah recklessly rushed after him to grab him, and then everything started spinning in New York. The first couldn't even imagine that Clifford would become his partner.